Hello everybody and welcome to this Research Twilight. Research Twilight number 6 is looking at metacognition. Before we begin, I thought you'd like this little bit of trivia. So the Welsh word for teaching is the same as the Welsh word for learning. I think I'm pronouncing this correctly, dysgu. So I absolutely love this. I think the idea of the word for teaching being the same as the word for learning puts the meaning of each of these concepts into that same abstract concept. It's a shared process. This will become relevant as we go through this session. So dysgu, let's think about that. As I say, we're looking at metacognition and in particular the 7-step model, which is covered in a blog by Julie Kettlewell on the EEF website. Metacognition is a sometimes misunderstood term, a misunderstood concept, and really I think that's because it's quite broad really in terms of what it covers. I want to clarify what metacognition is and make sure that you have this understanding of the kind of research behind why this is important to have metacognition in our classrooms, in our practice, and to really cover the way that it interacts with other pedagogical strategies. So we're going to look at a 7-step model. It's really a scaffolding framework which deliberately shifts responsibility for learning from the teacher to the pupil. Just remember that this 7-step model is not a lesson plan. In fact, it is not time specific. So this could be reflective of a process that takes maybe a unit of work, a term's worth of work, a year, even a whole qualification. It depends really. So it's about applying this process in these staged ways, but over a period of time, not a lesson. I was about to say not necessarily a lesson, but I would say certainly not within just one lesson. Okay, so let's go and have a look at what we did last time. So the Research Twilights, I'm trying to connect them together, make sure we've got that consistency and cohesion. And last time we looked at types of knowledge. If you didn't attend that session online, you could have a look at the resources for that session. So types of knowledge, we were thinking about students having, we're aiming for that deep, flexible knowledge, as opposed to the surface, inflexible knowledge that we so often see for students. We also talked about the very key role that rote learning plays in that learning process, but how it wasn't the end goal, that we wanted students to have more than just rote facts that they'd learned. And we talked about the importance of anecdotes and examples to help build a schema, to help students connect their knowledge to the wider world. It's that last one which I think is so important for this tonight's session, because metacognition to some extent is about being a storyteller and being able to tell the story of your understanding of a process, your understanding of knowledge. So having that skill of telling a story is so vital for our role as teachers. We also talked in the types of knowledge section about prior knowledge, and activating that prior knowledge is a crucial part of the learning journey, and it's where we actually begin in this 7-step process. What is metacognition? It's a term that people, really experienced teachers who've been engaging with research for quite a number of years, still find a little bit mystifying and a bit strange, because I think it sounds clinical, it sounds scientific, when actually really it's about us as experts talking through, clarifying for a student the process of the task at hand, rather than just the facts or rather than just the sort of process that we want them to go through. It's about giving them the full strategy, the full suite of tools that they need to have success in that learning journey. So put simply, and this is thanks to Hannah Smith, I asked if I could borrow her slide from her great presentation on metacognition. Put simply, it's thinking about one's thinking. More precisely, it refers to the processes used to plan, monitor and assess one's understanding and performance. For a lot of experts, or for people who are competent in a skill, the metacognitive process happens without them consciously thinking about it. It's something that they are doing naturally as part of the process. So if you use the driving analogy, when we're experienced drivers, we are doing all of the little subtle things that we need to do to plan, prepare for a journey, monitor our journey as we're driving along, seeing the pitfalls. We know how to tackle those pitfalls if we come across them, but we're not doing most of that consciously at all. Put even more simply, metacognition is being aware of your own learning processes and consequently being able to improve them. So there is that sense of helping students to see that learning belongs to them. It is not something that belongs to other people. It belongs to them. It is something they can get better at. It is something that they can own. Metacognition, if we talk about in the very quick way of thinking about thinking or talking about thinking, then that's where this is sort of built around this 7-step model. So the EEF 7-step model is all outlined in the blog that I've put a link to there, which I'll also put in the email when I send this out. Is all about moving from a place of quite heavily teacher-led instruction. If you look at the blue bar on the model there, that's the teacher-led part of the process. You can see that the pupil interaction is not passive, but is less active than the teacher at that stage. And it moves through 7 steps to a point where the student has experienced the learning journey and is at a point of reflection. And we move through 7 stages. The 7 stages are as follows. We must, in the learning process, activate prior knowledge. This is crucial. We need to know our starting points. That can be quite formalised in the form of a baseline test, but it can be quite casual in the form of question and answer in the classroom, just kind of taking the temperature of the room. Where are the students up to in this particular skill? The explicit strategy instruction, this is the direct instruction. There's a whole research twilight on that if you want to look more into the importance of direct instruction. This is the I do part of the I do, we do, you do process. And it's the telling the students the stuff. So don't be afraid to tell them how things work, what the answers are, what a good one looks like. Tell them the facts they need to know. Tell them what the end goal is. Tell them what some of the things that they'll encounter, the problems that they'll encounter might be. The third step is to show them, model what that looks like. And this could be a really good part of this process, to use a visualizer, to use modelled examples, to use both coping models and expert models. So that's a model where you show them a sort of perfect outcome alongside a model where you might show them how that might have gone wrong, or the choices and decisions that have been made in that particular piece of work. So modelling the strategy. This 4th step is about really embedding that strategy. It's okay to see it and to perhaps see how a piece of work needs to be planned or approached, but they need to be able to practice and actually memorise that strategy to a point where it becomes owned by the student. So 4 and 5 are very closely linked here, where a student is going to kind of start to play with the strategy that they've seen modelled. They're going to have a go at it. They're going to perhaps have that process marked or assessed in some kind of formative way. They're going to be maybe helped along with some scaffolding guidance. So there might be some sort of essay plans, or there might be some question frames that they can use. They might have a partner to work with. You can see that it links most carefully, really, the 5th section of this process to the we do part of the process. Once the student has had your direct instruction, they've seen how you would approach the problem or the task at hand, they've seen you actually doing it live and maybe verbalising under the visualizer, they've had a go themselves with a partner and some maybe guiding materials, and they've actually had a really good solid chance to practice and maybe get some feedback on that practice. They're then going to move into that 6th step, which is that independent chance to work. This is the you do part of the process. And for some students, that is going to also still have some degree of scaffolding in there, because we don't want to take the scaffolding off too quickly for some students. We also mustn't be afraid to send students off into that independent part too soon. Some of our students can do to be stretched and pushed into that independent part of the process a little bit earlier than perhaps we might ordinarily do so. So giving that appropriate level of challenge for students. Once they've gone through that process, it's then time to reflect, because only through reflection can the students actually get a sense of how successfully they applied the strategy that they'd learned. So This is all well and good in theory. How does that look in the classroom? Well, activating prior knowledge. You might have a series of questions. You want to know about what they've done in primary school if they're year sevens. If you're moving key stages, you're really going to want to sort of tap into what they've taken on from the previous key stage. But even lesson to lesson, what have you retained from last lesson? So question asking. For the second stage, this explicit instruction, talk to students about how you'll complete the task, take them through each step, discuss possible strategies, and also at this point, talk about that emotional regulation, knowing how to tackle failure, knowing how to bounce back from failure, knowing that certain aspects of this process are going to be really tricky. The modelling is all about verbalising, making sure they can see the choice of strategy that's applied, talking through the process to a student, maybe with a visualiser, maybe through a paper copy, and at the same time talking about how you, if you were going through this, would manage your emotions. There's a performative aspect to this, isn't there? When I do walking talking mocks, I do a lot of sort of pretend struggling. So I do things like, oh, well, that's a tricky question. That's a tricky character. And there's a performative element to showing the students where the thought processes might turn to, and then showing them, crucially, how to work through and beyond those challenges. The memorisation part, you might check to see what pupils have understood, see what they can remember, see if they can see the key aspects, the key maybe vocabulary or key learning points. Again, that might be through a quick, maybe like a bit of AFL, a bit of a quick check, a bit of a test maybe, a short quiz, like a true or false, low stakes quiz. The guided practice, well, multiple opportunities need to be built into that stage of the process. So it's no good to just say, have a short little bit of practice and then straight into independence. It might be multiple examples and multiple attempts at the same sorts of tasks, familiar tasks, so that it can start to build that confidence. Gradually, we're going to remove that as the students take on more responsibility. Pupils will then complete the task by themselves without support, and pupils will consider any changes that they think they should make next time, whether the strategies they chose were effective and how their emotions affected their behaviour. This is important, isn't it, this idea of the emotional regulation being part of the metacognitive process, because ultimately, again, that's something that we're doing often as experts. We're regulating our approach to the process of learning. We know not to take failure too much to heart, but we know to learn from it. Whereas a student who perhaps has only ever faced failure in a negative way might, at the very earliest opportunity, see logically that that's the time to give up. Okay, I want to link, as I say, a few key points from the blog back to some of the research twilights that we've already had, so that you can perhaps broaden your understanding of this concept by maybe revisiting some other research twilights if you have the time. So in Julie Catawba's blog, if you can click on the link and have a read of it, you'll see some key points coming out, such as Julie says we should always be seeking to scaffold towards greater independence. That is our goal at all points, but not to see that as too soon a goal, particularly for students who are perhaps struggling with the content or the process at hand. You might be confused why there's two meerkats on the screen, but if you visited the research twilight that we had in the hall that covered this, you'll know about it not being good enough to just let students go off and discover for themselves. That sort of student discovery learning has been really sort of debunked in recent years. Pupils don't just develop self-sufficiency by just being given a task to go off and do on their own. In the meerkat example, if they did that, they'd go off and eat a scorpion the wrong way, and they'd be hurt or poisoned by the scorpion. So they've got to see somebody actually model that to them in order to be able to build up to that safe independence. And finally, by improving pupil performance, we can develop their belief in their own competence and in turn their motivation to achieve. This is something that I've been thinking about quite a lot recently with our pupil premium students who face great disadvantage, but all students who perhaps have got perhaps low self-esteem or are perhaps prone to giving up early in the process of learning, is that actually early wins and early success in a learning cycle, it breeds confidence and it breeds that self-efficacy. So it allows students to see success as something that belongs to them, and therefore to want to do it again and to achieve again. So anything you can do early in your learning process, and I would actually say this applies to a lesson, early in a lesson, for students to be able to feel a sense of success is really, really important. So it's where those bell tasks at the beginning of the lesson take on a kind of superhuman power, really, where they're not just kind of settling the class while you get the register done, but they're actually allowing students an early win and that bolster to their self confidence, and really that feedback loop of success that is going to just breed motivation and a willingness to learn. Okay, I hope that metacognition is a little bit clearer for you, this idea of making the implicit strategies that we use for thinking and for thinking hard, making those implicit strategies explicit, verbalizing them, and that you are clear that metacognition works in tandem with independence and scaffolding and modelling and lots of the other sort of pedagogical features that we might touch on and talk about in our training. So the learning journey is a shared process between the teacher and the student. Remember that dusky from the Welsh language. As we progress through the journey, the emphasis becomes less on the teacher input and more on the student working independently, not necessarily within a lesson, but definitely throughout a learning process. Success breeds self-efficacy, which breeds motivation. We are the experts. Make our internal processes visible and external by verbalizing and narrating thought. That's the key. When we can tell stories about how we're thinking, then it becomes less mysterious for students how somebody can be successful at whatever task is at hand. I hope that's been helpful. I hope that you've been able to get something from that you can take forward into your lessons. If you did want to connect with any of the other research twilights that we've looked at, the materials are all on the shared drive, and I'll make that clear in the email that I send out. And thanks for your engagement with this. Any comments or additions or any thoughts that you want to add, please just let me know. Thanks, folks. Thanks for listening.